channel. Today we're going to learn how to build the Walker Double Dragon.
As always, the parts will be listed in the description below. Also, I'll try and put timestamps in there. When building a computer, you're going to want to work on a non-conductive surface because of static electricity. So if you don't have an anti-static mat, that's okay. You could work on cardboard. I'd recommend putting bubble wrap in between. That way when you're pressing the RAM in or the CPU cooler, it takes that pressure and it doesn't damage your motherboard. Also, you're going to want to ground yourself periodically. You could install your PSU into your case, plug it in, turn it on, and then just make sure a bare piece of skin is touching that case all the time. Like you could rest your foot on it or rest your leg against it if you're wearing shorts. It's just important that you don't zap anything while you're building the computer. When you're installing the CPU, there's an arrow on the top of the CPU. Just make sure that's lined up with the top of the arrow on the top of the cover. You can also line up the notches on the CPU. When you open that cover up, just make sure you don't drop anything in there. Those pins are really fragile. Right there, I'm putting in the back plate for my CPU cooler. You could do that after you put your RAM in. Make sure you don't lose that plastic cover if you ever sell your motherboard or need to get it repaired for some reason. You'll need to put that back in. See the notches on there? You just line those up and you'll be good to go. Once I have it down in there, I just give it a little wiggle back and forth just to make sure it's seated right. And that cover, you can lift off the bottom, or you can, when you press down the arm, it'll pop off as well. Now I'm taking off the heatsink shield for the SSD. Just make sure you peel off the plastic from the heatsink shields. And sometimes it's below as well. When you're putting your M.2 drive in, it goes in on a 30-degree angle. Mine has a quick clip there that you just press around. Sometimes you might have to put a screw in there on your motherboard. Sometimes the screw will have to go through the heatsink, which really sucks. We're using DDR5 with this motherboard. This is a MSI Z690 carbon Wi-Fi, and it's a DDR5 only. It is directional. DDR4 and DDR5 is directional. You also want to make sure you put that in the correct slots. It should be marked on your motherboard. If not, it's in your manual. It's usually A2 and B2. Today we're working in Lian O11D dynamic mini case. Everything has captive screws on it. After you remove the top, you can remove the glass pieces by sliding them up. The back also has 2 captive screws. There is a wire cover with 1 captive screw and a screw on the bottom that is not captive. You actually have to take out with a screwdriver. I'm also removing the hard drive cage because I won't be using it, and I'll get better airflow and easier wire management without it. Make sure before you put in your motherboard that your standoffs are in the correct position. This particular case has a plate you need to put in for an ATX motherboard, so that's what I just put in. Also make sure you put in your back plate if that's not attached to your motherboard. When you're putting in your screws, I like to just put them in all loose and then tighten them up after they're all in to make sure that they all line up correctly. They also need to just be in there snug. This thing's not going anywhere, so you don't have to worry about them falling out. And there's enough of them. There's 9, so it's not going anywhere. The motherboard, the reason I chose it, it's a good motherboard for overclocking. It's got everything I need on it, and I definitely plan on overclocking the i7 that I have in there, which is a 12700K. Right now it's got some thermal issues yet, and so I have not overclocked it yet. Also, I'm gonna change out that cooler. I just put it in there because I wanted to have the double dragon. But once the coolers with the LCD screens come down in price a little bit, I will definitely be getting a different cooler. When applying thermal paste, it really doesn't matter as long as there's enough. I have a particular method I use. That way, every single time I get the same results. So I know that if there's an issue, it was me, or if it was the part. I'm using Thermal Grizzly Cryonaut, by the way, and that's an i7 12700K. And the reason I picked that is because it doesn't draw too much power, but it is a powerful CPU, more than enough for video editing and gaming, and it'll be fun for overclocking as well. As you see, I thermal paste both the CPU cooler and the CPU, and the reason I do that is because I personally have better results this way, and I think it's just because the way I apply thermal paste. When I put these on, as you can see, I go crosswise, and that's to just get as even as contact as I can. I go all the way down. Again, you're not cranking them down, but these LGA 1700s, they really do like to have a little bit more pressure. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend this CPU cooler for anybody. The cold plate looked about 2 millimeters in diameter smaller than the EVGA CLC 280. I just don't like how that one looks. I do have that one on the shelf though, I could put it in. On the back here, I'm putting in Arctic 140 millimeter fans. If I take them above 80%, they hit the back of the case. Just so you know, if you plan on building in this case or using these fans, they do float a bit. Even removing the filter on the back, it still hits the case above 80% fan speed. The best results you'll get with this case is to go with intake with your 280 on the side there, and intake on the bottom, 3 fans as well. I'll be putting fans on the front of this as well. I'll be doing so it'll be a push-pull method. I also plugged in both 8-pin connectors, which is totally unnecessary for this motherboard. Or if it's an 8-pin and a 4-pin, I don't remember, but either way I just did so it looked good. No, it's 2 8-pins. Totally unnecessary. Again, I'm going with a push-pull method here, and that's just to maximize the cooling, and then you also don't have to have your fans at a highest speed because you have 4 of them. But it doesn't matter with this cooler because the cold plate is the problem with it, and the mounting system. I try my best to hide wires when I can. As you see, I hid the wires behind the screws. They're all going down one side of the fans. They're behind the screws, and so they all come out in one area. These fans I accidentally put in backwards. As soon as I started filming, I noticed what I did and had to flip them over. You definitely want intake from the bottom, so that's going directly into your GPU. And then also the intake from the radiator there, that'll help with that as well. And then you exhaust out the top, obviously. You can exhaust out the back as well, but that's going to cover up your motherboard, and one of the reasons I chose this motherboard was because of the Dragon. and so I don't want to put a fan in front of it. The fans I'm using are snow fans. They have a 79 CFM and I think it's 2.5 H2O rating. So they're really good on either the radiator or on just having as regular fans for airflow. Since the top is exhaust, you really don't need to have the filter up top. If you want to make your fans a little bit more efficient, you can remove that filter, and you're really not going to get much dust, because when you turn on the fans, it's just going to blow it right out of the top. These fans have two wires, a 4-pin PWM and a 3-pin ARGB wire. I have 13 ARGB devices on this particular computer, so there's wires galore, and no matter what case you worked in, it was going to be hard to manage these wires. But I gotta give it to Lian Lee here. It was pretty easy to manage them in this case. Just remember the fans blow towards the cage side of the fan. And also when you're installing them, line up the wires where you want them to go before you screw them down, so that it's easier to route the wires. In general, it's best to have equal airflow, so just as much intake as you have exhaust. But if you're gonna pick one or the other, it's better to have intake generally. But on an ITX case, you want exhaust. Right now we're just plugging in the motherboard, power switch, HDD LEDs, and when you're doing that, on the bottom of them, there's a little arrow. That's the positive side if the top doesn't have a positive and negative, just so you know. They're kind of hard to push in. A couple of them are just 1-pin wires. See, like that power switch, there's an arrow on it. It's got to go upside down. But the power LEDs are 1-pin wires, so they're kind of hard to get in there. This is the USB Type-C cable and USB 3.0 cable. I try to hide them behind the 24-pin. That way you see less cables. There's so many in here that as many as I can hide, I will. And at normal angles, you're not even gonna see those wires. They're tucked away real nice. The back was just a mess to begin with. That computer, from where they came from, see how there's like wires laying off the top of the screen and the bottom and the left of the screen, and it just gives you a point to start working with. And obviously you use the Velcro straps until you get everything where you want it. You might have to do it several times. You might have to unclip wires and then reclip them because you want to run them a different way. In this case, you don't have to be too particular about wires because they do have a nice back plate there that you can cover it all up with. But I got OCD, so I sat there for hours running these wires, and eventually I got them looking decent. But try and keep your flat cables together, try and keep your round cables together. When you have this many wires, good luck. I don't know what else to tell you. I don't know how I do it sometimes. It came out looking amazing when it was done, but my God, it took me forever. If you don't have Velcro straps, use twist ties until you're sure where everything's going, then use zip ties. Follow the natural layout as much as you can. Anytime you can tuck something behind the case, do it. There's usually a border along the edge. Save your braided cables for last, so you can put them on the top, so you can hide all the ugly cables behind it, especially if you got a lot of ARGB cables that you're going to be, what I do with those 3-pin wires is I electric tape them together because I don't want them to pull apart, and I don't want anybody seeing electric tape. So I make sure that all those wires are all the way in the back, and then braided cables in front of them, and then the best braided cables at the very top. And then you're putting that faceplate on, and you're not going to see it anyways. When you're plugging in these cables, it's real self-explanatory where they go, what direction. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comment section. But yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory. As you can see, I put the power supply cables in last because they look the best. Here's our graphics card. It's a 3080 12 gigabyte. It'll be great for what I do. Mostly all I do is video editing, and I game, but lightly. I'm sorry, I didn't get that bracket. I moved that bracket up though. It didn't get stuck on that bottom one like that. I did move it up. All the wires are XPG ARGB wires, and the bracket down there is an up here ARGB bracket. And that's how it all looks when it's all done. Here's our Time Spy scores. The first score on the screen is our stock settings. I also put the thermals on the screen for both the CPU and GPU. And here's the overclock setting. This is just a daily overclock of just the GPU. I didn't touch the CPU or the memory yet. And here's Fire Strike at the stock settings. And again, there's our thermals for both the CPU and the GPU. And then there's our Fire Strike with the overclock. And I also put the thermals up there for you guys. Thanks for watching the video, guys. I'm gonna leave you here with an outro with a little music and a little teaser video. If you got any questions, like I said, just leave them in the comments section. Take care and goodbye.